We just dropped a trailer for the new Malifaux expansion, Madness of Malifaux, and it's got a ton of cool stuff. Let's check it out. So in case you missed it, Weird put out a couple-minute long trailer last week showing off some of the stuff from the new Madness of Malifaux expansion. We got to take a look at all 6 of the new masters, plus some of the stuff that's going to be coming in their crews. And on top of that, they even did a quick flip-through of the first couple of pages of the story. So we got a little peek at what's coming up in the narrative. So let's go through all the art that they showed us and see if we can figure out what all this stuff is, based on everything that we know and maybe a little speculating to fill in the gaps. Then I'll take you through some of what we learned from reading the first couple pages of the story. Don't worry, I'll give you a spoiler warning before that comes up, in case you don't want to know yet. There's not a ton there, but there's some interesting stuff. And stick around till the end, because I'm going to be announcing the winner of the giveaway for a copy of Malifaux Burns, so you can see if you won. Of course, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you want to talk more about this stuff, you can hop over to the Discord. When this trailer dropped, everybody in the Discord was going crazy, taking guesses about the new characters and talking about the factions they might be from, and it's a great time. And if you like what I'm doing and you want to support the channel, then jump over to the Patreon and consider pitching in a couple bucks. But with that, let's check out that trailer. So the trailer opens by giving us some information about what the Burning Man is up to. Apparently, it's actually disappeared and no one knows where it's gone. We're then told that some unfamiliar faces are going to come out of the woodwork, and as we already knew, they confirm that there's going to be 6 new masters across all 8 factions. Then they reveal all 6 of the masters, and then show some of the other models that are coming to the game. I'm going to do them out of order because I think it makes a little more sense. To start off, they show Damien Ravencroft from the Arcanist, as well as a bunch of models from his crew. Now these are all things that we saw on Waldo's Weekly a few weeks ago, and they were even pre-released at Gen Con, so nothing new here. If you want to learn more about Damien and his puzzle box, then there'll be a video linked above, where I go over a bit of his story since he's been around since 1st edition. Next up, we got to see Ling Li, and quick note, I looked up some help on how to pronounce that name, since it's Vietnamese, and that's the best I could come up with. So if I'm pronouncing that wrong, let me know. Now, we already know that she's going to be a 10 Thunders Master, and we don't know what her story is in total, but we do know that she's tied to the Library of All Things. Again, a link to a video covering some of that will be above. And then we got a better look at some of the models that are going to be in her crew. First up, we got this sloth-looking dude. He seems really cool. And one of the things you're going to notice is that all of Ling Li's models deal with books and scrolls to tie into the library theme, which I think is really cool. Next, we got this ape guy, and I think it's really cool that a lot of her crew seems to have an animal theme as well. I wonder if we're going to learn more about some of the in-universe stories that these come from, and maybe that'll explain why there's so many animals. Both of these models were actually in the case at Gen Con, so we can be pretty confident that they go with her crew. Now, the next one they showed in the video is this lion, and as far as I know, this was not in the case at Gen Con, but considering the scrolls and the animal theme, I think it seems pretty likely that they'll be with her as well. And the last one we have for Ling Li's crew is this painter person. Now, we know that a lot of the models in her crew are basically going to be manifestations of characters from stories in the library, and this model looks like they're going to be able to write some stories, so maybe that'll tie in mechanically and give the crew the ability to summon new models. Or maybe it'll be an upgrade heavy crew, and this model will have the ability to rewrite the stories to give the other characters new abilities. But either way, it looks really cool. I'm super excited about this crew. The models look really awesome, and I'm really looking forward to digging into their story. Ha, get it, story. Anyway, next up, we have Castor confirmed. So if you're not already familiar with Castor, then once again, there'll be a video linked above where you can learn a little bit more about him. But the long and short of it is, he's one of the old Nephilim who did not become a Black Blood, and instead, he's been forced to feed on other Black Bloods to survive. He's basically a Nephilim vampire. So we got a first look at both of his titles, including Skinny Castor and Brolic Castor. And once again, both of these models were shown in the case at Gen Con. And I have to say, for Castor Fervent, I don't think this art does him justice. The model looks really sick. And moving on, we got a bunch of models that are going to be in his crew. The first one being the shaman-looking lady, who's pouring some sort of liquid on what looks like a human. Now, my guess as far as this model goes is that this is some sort of ritual where they're trying to turn humans into Black Bloods. We know that Castor has to feed on Black Bloods, and we also know that he doesn't really like doing that, since they're basically his family. So maybe he's trying to figure out a way to turn humans into Black Bloods so he can eat them instead. And next, we have a big sword cutting into some Nephilim. Now, bet money that this is Marathon, Castor's living blade. Living blades were weapons forged by the Fae and infused with the blood of the Nephilim that gave the Nephilim the ability to call on old magics. They're partially alive, and some have the ability to transform. You might be familiar with living blades because Nekima wields a living blade called Lorelei, and Lilith had a living blade called Alrune. We know that Castor has Marathon, and since he's not wielding it in either of his titles, then there's a good bet that this is it. Next up, we have this kind of cool looking Nephilim, and in the case at Gen Con, he was actually next to another model that looks pretty similar. So these might be Castor's mature Nephilim equivalents. Interestingly, they look just like the art for the Scavenger Nephilim from the Through the Breach from Nightmares book. Same shape horns, and that big patch of fur on his back. Next, we have this guy who looks kind of a mess. He's covered in blood, and if you notice, his wings appear to be clipped. Or maybe they didn't develop properly. Maybe he's a new form of hybrid, since we know that all the other ones don't have wings either. But either way, I like his spiked club. And speaking of cool weapons, I think this model looks the most like a traditional vampire, since he looks a little fancy, like he might be royalty or something. But either way, I love the big polearm he's carrying, and I'm looking forward to seeing what that does in the game. And then we have this albino looking dude. I don't know what this thing is. Maybe it's an offshoot of the Nephilim that's been stuck in a cave for a long time, so it's evolved differently over the centuries. I'm not even sure I would have guessed he was part of Castor's crew, except for the fact that we saw him in the case with the rest of the crew at Gen Con. But maybe that's just a trick. And on that same note, this model was also in the case at Gen Con with Castor. But I'm pretty sure this model goes with another master that we're going to talk about in a minute. And we know that there's going to be some cross-faction models between some of these masters if they keep doing the title boxes the way they've been doing them. So this model could be in Castor's crew and the other crew. But let's hold off on talking about that for now. And then finally we have Gwyll, who we already know is part of the keyword. Overall, I think this crew looks awesome, and I think I'm going to double down on my guess that Castor is going to be Neverborn and Rezzers. And the reason I say that is because A, all these models are clearly Neverborn, and I can't really think of a good reason why they wouldn't be part of the faction. And B, it makes sense for them to be Rezzers since they kind of have that whole vampire theme going. But also, having Gwyll be part of the keyword, but in a totally different faction and not being versatile, would be pretty weird. So that seems like the best guess. And now we get to the new stuff. Making their debut in the game, in this trailer we got a look at the Clampets. If you thought having 2 models as a master was cool, how about a whole family? These guys seem to have a fishing theme, since their keyword is angler, and a lot of the stuff we've seen revolves around the gibbering hordes, or other aquatic creatures. This thing that they're riding looks like a Silurid, but it seems a little big, and a little bit off, so it could very well be one of the gibbering hordes. Now we know that this is one of the more minor gremlin families, because they haven't been mentioned in the lore yet, and they don't even have a specific territory marked out on the Bayou map. As Swarmlord from the Discord pointed out, they are mentioned very briefly in the Bayou Through the Breach supplement, but that's pretty much it. We also get a couple of quotes from someone named Joel Clampett, who had some words of wisdom to share with all of us. No word yet on whether he's part of that immediate family, or if we're going to get a model of him at all. Speaking of, they also showed a few models that seem to go with this crew. First, we got this gremlin jousting on a snail, and I really don't know what to say about this, except that I love it, and that this is exactly the kind of energy I want out of my gremlins. As far as I know, we weren't previously aware of any giant snails in the bayou, so I wonder what else might be creeping around in there. Next, we got this dapper looking gentleman manning a ballista Nebelwerfer. That thing looks pretty awesome, and I think it would actually make sense to go in the Cavalier keyword. I don't know why the King's Empire or the Guild would be working with the Gremlins, but this thing looks like some King's Empire tech, and that'd be a pretty cool dual faction model. And then we got this guy on his bucking Bronco, and again, this thing kind of looks like a Silurid, but not exactly. Maybe this is a new form, somewhere between a Gup and a Silurid, because it kind of looks like a tadpole, or maybe it's a gibbering horde or another creature altogether. Either way, kind of cool. We need more Gremlin cavalry out there. And then we got another look at the Skulker skin, which is a model that we saw a few weeks back. Now this one is definitely from the Gibbering Hordes. That's very clearly a striped Skulker skin that he's wearing. So maybe this crew will have other connections to the Gibbering Hordes. And that gets us back to the question of factions. Now we know that Ravencroft is an Arcanist, that Ling Li is in Ten Thunders, and if I'm right about Castor, he's in Neverborn and Rezzers. So that leaves us with Bayou, Guild, Explorer Society, and Outcasts. And this crew just strikes me as Bayou. Nothing here really screams Explorer Society or Outcast to me, and they're obviously not Guild. Now maybe the Explorer Society has teamed up with these guys as part of their efforts to explore the sunken city, but nothing here except that ballista guy really screams that they're working with humans. But I guess we'll have to see. And next up we have Harold Tull in both of his title forms. Now right away, you should notice 2 things. 1, he has an adorable cat, or maybe he is an adorable cat. And 2, he very clearly looks like he's from the King's Empire, which is a faction in the other side, and it's basically alternate history England. Now when I saw this, I thought to myself, I guess the Guild has really done a good job of spreading their anti-racist sentiments around the world, because this guy would obviously be a member of some rank in the King's Empire military. And then I realized, I don't actually know when the British military desegregated in the real world. So I did some poking around online, and it was surprisingly hard to get information about this. I saw one suggestion that said that the British military was desegregated by the time of World War I, which we're coming up on in a few years in the Malifaux timeline. But that black and brown soldiers were not allowed to occupy certain ranks. They basically had to be grunts. But if anybody out there knows any more about that subject, please let us all know. I'd be super curious. But either way, we know that the one redeeming quality of the Guild is that they're not racist or sexist. So maybe they've just done a good job of influencing the King's Empire. But back to Mr. Tull. Now this crew will presumably have the Cavalier keyword. And this is where it starts to get a little harder to predict which models go to which masters. First up, we got this masked gunman here. Now the mask kind of throws me off, because the King's Empire doesn't really do a lot of masks. But the rifle and these little clockwork gadgets definitely scream King's Empire. In the other side, that faction is all about their guns. And this rifle looks pretty close to some of the things we've seen over there. And next we have this lady, who looks like she's having a blast. And again, nothing about this really screams King's Empire to me, but you could kind of call this cavalry. And again, lots of guns. Next we have this chonky boy, and if you weren't already convinced this crew's from the King's Empire, he's just got a big Union Jack on his shield. Kinda like the King's Hand, which is another big robot model from the King's Empire. I'm a little disappointed, because I really didn't ever want to have to freehand another British flag after doing the last one, but it seems like Weird doesn't care about my happiness. Dope model though. And next we have this dog and his human. Malifaux's got quite a few really good dogs in it, and we were arguing in the Discord about which dogs are the best dogs and where this one fits in the ranking. I'm not going to spoil it. If you want to know, you got to come over there and kick in your vote. But suffice it to say, this is a pretty good dog. Now, interestingly, this guy appears to be a medic, and Merchant of Madness on the Discord pointed out that this same model appeared in the other side case at Gen Con for the King's Empire. Shout out to Merchant of Madness. He also pointed out that that suggests that this could be Dr. John Watson, the long-lost adjunct that we were supposed to get for the other side after the Obsidian Gate event years ago. It all seems pretty likely, and I'm excited because that means we're getting more models that cross over between both games. Also, in case you're wondering if this Watson is that Watson, and yes, it's the same guy. So as far as factions for this crew, we know that the Guild and the King's Empire are historically not the best of friends. But we also know that in light of the cult coming and the gibbering hordes invading, that they've kind of worked out a truce. The enemy of my enemy and all that. So it seems likely that this crew is going to be part of the Guild. And again, I don't really see a good reason to say they'd be part of any other faction. So that just leaves us with the Explorer Society and the Outcasts. And that also brings us to Tiri. This one's so cool. Now, looking at Tiri the Nomad, at first I sort of got some fishy vibes from her. And she has the same color skin as the Storm Siren. So I was thinking that she might be a Siren, which are one of the other types of Fae from Old Malifaux. But looking at Tiri the Architect, I think it's much more likely that she's one of the Awa? Awa? I really have no idea how to say that. Weird, you're really killing me with this stuff. But anyway, let's talk a little bit about who they were, and then we'll get back to Tiri. Now, you may know Fae as being Titania's keyword, but originally the Fae were the first inhabitants of Malifaux, and Titania was one of them. As the Fae spread across the world, they adapted to different geographies and took on different characteristics and appearances. This broke down as the Gigants, the Keepers, the Awa, the Dreaming Ones, the Sirens, and the Dryads. The Awa lived in a desert far to the west of Malifaux, and they were known for building giant cities and developing advanced technology. They built constructs and arcane engines and were known for gifting jewelry to visitors. They were known to be tall and strong, with brilliantly colored eyes and warm-colored skin. They participated in the war against the tyrants, but Shirufei held a significant grudge against them and tried to obliterate them. They were defeated, but some of their members survived and escaped back to the desert. So going back to Tiri, we can see many of the characteristics I just described, especially in the architect form. She's obviously got constructs and technology, as well as brilliantly colored eyes. She's covered in jewelry, and she looks pretty tall and strong. The only one I'm not sure about is the warm-colored skin, as she's kind of this cold green. But maybe there's some variation within the species, or maybe things have changed. I also think this might tie into why she's suddenly emerging after so long, because the Burning Man just showed up, and he's half Shirufei, who she probably sees as an old enemy. So moving on, we gotta look at a couple of models that look like they might be in her crew, including this lady, who appears to be some sort of construct with a pretty cool looking sword. It's not super obvious that this belongs to Tiri, but you can see these little dangly bits she's got on her. They look a lot like the ones that Tiri's wearing. Some sort of jewelry, I suppose. Now, I may be reading into this too much, but it kind of looks like she's got two Japanese rising sun flags, one on the sword and one on her chest. So maybe I'm wrong about everything and this thing's actually from the Three Kingdoms. Or maybe it's just a coincidence, and I've been staring at these pictures for way too long. Anyway, next we have this guy, who appears to maybe be the same species as Tiri. The structure of his head looks pretty similar with that upside down triangle. It just seems to be missing that bit at the top. You'll also notice he seems to be some sort of craftsman, or a blacksmith, which ties in with the whole theme of the Awa. He's also holding what looks to be a relic hammer, which would be pretty interesting. I'd love to know the story behind how he got a hold of that thing. Hopefully we'll learn pretty soon. And next we have this character. At first he kind of looked like a construct to me, but I think it's just a dude wearing some armor. And he definitely appears to be the same species, because he's got the triangle shaped head, the brilliant colored eyes, and similar legs and feet to Tiri and the last guy. I wonder what he's doing with this pole, but I definitely like his pose. It'd be interesting to see what he does on the table. And now let's get back to this strange Atlas looking dude. Now he was in the case with Castor, but I'm not really sure he's going to be part of Castor's crew. He seems to be in line with Tiri's themes, advanced technology and constructs and all that. But to be honest, Atlas himself looks a little bit more like a King's Empire construct, with the way he's built. And he has a pretty human looking face from what we can see. Obviously a lot of this has been speculation, but this one is the one I'm least sure about. So if you have a theory, be sure to share it in the comments below. And that's everything we got from the trailer. As far as factions go, if I'm right about everything so far, then that makes Tiri part of the Explorer Society and the Outcasts. Now it's pretty tough to guess what master is going to be part of the Outcasts, and frankly, if any of the other ones were part of Outcasts, I wouldn't be too surprised, because that's a faction that's sort of defined by its lack of cohesiveness. But it seems reasonable that Tiri might become part of the Explorer Society, because we know that they like recruiting many different types of people to help them uncover more mysteries. And it wouldn't be surprising if we found out that Jedza, who's been around for quite a while as well, knows Tiri and introduces her to the rest of the explorers. But then again, maybe Tiri is solo explorers and the Clampets are part Outcasts. Or maybe Tiri is solo Outcasts and the Clampets have been recruited by the Explorer Society to explore the sunken city. I don't know, there's a lot of different ways this can go. Let me know what you think in the comments. And now let's talk a little bit about the narrative bits that we saw in the book. Big spoiler warning, if you don't want to know the first 6 pages or so of the upcoming story, feel free to tune out now. So I'm not going to go over it beat by beat because we don't have the whole story yet, but I want to touch on a few things that stuck out to me as important. The story opens with Marlowe sitting in his destroyed office and talking to some of his attendants. We find out that the guild had requested assistance from Earthside, and the King's Empire responded to their call and are sending Tull, and we know that Hoffman is headed to the train station to meet him. We get a mention that something strange is going on in Japan, which is probably a reference to the upcoming story from the other side involving the Komoan invasion. Somebody looks at a copy of the Malifaux Tattler and mentions that it seems incoherent and not even spell checked properly, which is a reference to the fact that Nellie is under the influence of the Burning Man. There's also a mention that Base is out looking for Parker, and that Karis is continuing to attack the guild with the help of some of her cultists. Marlowe also mentions that Lucius is still missing. We get a quick bit from Shenlong's perspective, and the man mentions that the tyrant the dragon, who currently possesses him, seems to be in fear at the presence of the Burning Man. Next, we see Damien Ravencroft walking through a crowd of people and having a secret meeting with Colette. She passes him a copy of The Flamme, the book that indoctrinates cultists into the Burning Man's ranks, and he passes her an envelope in payment. He also gives her a letter that she finds out is from Ramos, and she asks Ravencroft if he's working for him. Ravencroft says that sometimes their interests align, but that he's his own man. He then suggests that he and Colette should work together, since they have similar interests as well. Colette seems to agree, and then they part ways, and Ravencroft returns to his new hideout. There he meets Bella, and briefly discusses the incident between Sandeep, Rasputina, and Lothbot, before turning his attention to the book, and sitting down to study it. And that's everything we got from the narrative so far. Just a little teaser, enough to get me really excited to get my hands on the new book. It's going to be a long month or two. I'm especially happy to see that the story seems to be tying in a lot of the different masters from across the game, because the story in Malifaux Burns really heavily focused on the 8 masters that are influenced by the Burning Man. So it'll be interesting to see how the 6 new masters tie into that, and what everybody else has been up to. Of course, stay tuned to the channel as more information gets released. Well, that's all the hot news we have for this week. But before we go, if you didn't already know, we've had a giveaway going on the channel for the past couple of weeks. So I randomly chose one of the eligible commenters, and the winner is Kevin Dillard, who simply posted, "This video is fire, this news is fire." Well, I hope you're going to think this book is fire. You'll find my email address in the description below, so shoot me an email with your shipping information and I'll get that sent out to you right away. If you didn't win, don't be too sad, because I plan on doing a bunch more giveaways in the near future, so keep an eye out on the channel to learn more about that. In the meantime, like and subscribe, join the Discord to come hang out and chat with us, and if you're interested, check out the Patreon. You can support me and the channel, and you can get these videos without the ads and all this extra stuff at the end as well. And of course, thanks for watching.